There was a thing we talked briefly about it yesterday. There was again, it comes down to social media. There was someone who tweeted a very controversial statement which said, if you use the words "we see" in a script, you're a bad writer. You are bad. And it got a bunch of stuff, and that writer ended up blocking everyone and then making his comment, his Twitter private.
Oh wow, he was
he did. Anyway, I'm not saying
that's close to the other extreme, but yeah.
But I do want to have a conversation about perceived rules and where those are up to today. That's
really interesting. So what would you say are the most commonly perceived rules of screenwriting?
Yeah, great question. Well, I always remember when we started working together, the very first script I sent you, which was called The Pickup, I wrote "we see" in it a lot. We do, we hear, we this, we that. And you had said, just be careful of that. I've heard from my teacher, I think was at the time, that's a bit of a no-no. Now, that particular one, I think is, again, it's where are you in your career? Because if I were to pick up a script from a new writer and it was filled with those, I think I would have a reaction to that.
You do? Interesting.
I do. I'm not going to lie about that. Again, I wouldn't say I'm a snob about it, but I do notice them.
What do you think it is about that bothers you?
Because it feels redundant. A lot of the time.
I agree with that.
It feels redundant language use. And so I go, this person hasn't spent as long writing this script as they could. They've fallen back on an easy
I mean, in theory, right, the reason behind that rule is because everything that you write, everything in a screenplay should be seen.
Yes.
It's on the screen.
Yes.
So if I say, we see a table and chairs, well, duh.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's
a table and chair.
Yeah. If you were to, it's exactly, Jake enters the room. We see a table and chairs in the corner. We hear Jamiroquai playing on the radio.
Right.
Don't need any of it. Jake enters the room. A table and chairs are in the corner. Jamiroquai's on the radio.
Exactly. Now, there probably are occasions where it's not clear.
I agree.
That the camera is supposed to be in one place and the action for the scene is happening in another place.
Yes.
So Jake and Ben are having a conversation. We see that behind them, someone's poking their face through the window. Could, in theory...
But again, it's Jake and Ben are having a conversation. Someone pokes their head through the window.
And the reality is, you could say, if the point was that you didn't want them to see it, you could say, unnoticed by them.
Exactly right. Now, there are times when I feel like it's very useful. I feel like if you're trying to create kind of like a shot, but don't want to specifically... Say again?
When do you think you should create a shot?
Well, whenever we write, we want to create the image in the mind of the reader of what that person is seeing on the screen. Sure. So, for example, if it were the London skyline,
great,
you might say we soar down through the streets following one person.
Could I say soaring through the streets following one person?
You maybe could. But again, it would be the way that it was constructed might be.
I mean, technically speaking, as I just said, everything written is either seen or heard, or at least, I mean, we do things in our scripts that aren't necessarily seen or heard in a literal sense, but would be seen through a character's emotional response. And every once in a while, we comment to the reader as well. As if
again, I think that's okay. I think it's okay to write things in scripts occasionally that aren't perceived
action
on screen.
Specifically action.
Yes.
Is intended to be seen.
Yes.
If I'm writing a line of action, it's intended to be seen. So why, I guess, and I'm not this is just this is the conversation, because I tend to be on your side, which is I don't think it's always, I don't think that you have to follow that rule, because I tend to be very much against rules of screenwriting.
I agree. Yes.
But you would really have to convince me why those two words are necessary.
I agree.
And so far in our writing, I
think we've maybe used it a couple of times, and only when we genuinely cannot find, like, if we see is that beginning, like, it's always going to be the easiest version.
Right.
It's always going to be the easiest version. So anyway,
it's so easy that it feels cheap, is I think part of the problem with using it. It feels cheap versus trusting. And I think that's what it is. A seasoned screenwriter trusts that the visual they're creating through their action will be able to be seen in the reader's mind. A person who uses we see or we move down or we this or we that is not trusting. You're feeling like you have to tell them that that's what's happening, when the reality is that is what's happening.
And yet, WGA Awards season comes, we get sent all the scripts, and I find we sees here and there all the time.
Well, that's why I asked you why you would judge, why you would look down upon a young screenwriter, because I don't know that there should be two standards.
And yet there are. I feel that if you are an emerging screenwriter, you should be putting your best foot forward. And I think that currently and again, I might be wrong about this. I'm not a reader. We are now moving into producer stuff. And occasionally I see that we're developing 2 scripts at the moment with other writers, and both of them have at 3. And I think all of them have we sees in them. Again, I don't go, but I would very
go. See, I don't look. If it was every sentence, I would go, this person needs to this person needs to work on it.
Overuse.
If I saw it a few times in a script, I'd go, okay, that's their choice. They're the writer. I don't judge it unless it hurts the read.
Yes.
But I will say that it does give me a sense sometimes of a writer who is thinking too much like a director. That's one of the things that I do. And times that when I see camera movements, dolly up, pan down,
raining,
I go, this person went to film school. This person's thinking like a director, and that's not necessarily terrible. I think that it's just I think it depends on who's reading it, right? Like, if you're an emerging screenwriter, the most likely the people reading your script are readers, and readers are taught to pay attention to rules.
I know.
Whereas if you're giving a script to a director, they don't give a shit.
Totally.
We're not going to go, how dare this writer write dolly up?
But it's tough, isn't it? Because I was reading something which was about
whatever, you know what I mean.
Nightcrawler, and that an assistant was given the script for Nightcrawler without the title page on it and not knowing where it came from, and apparently it's filled with we sees.
Yeah, sure.
And we this and we that.
That's what I mean. An assistant,
and that person didn't get the job because they were making criticisms about we see. So it's like, what do you do?
Interesting. The reader didn't get the job because they made criticisms on an award-winning screenplay.
Completely. So anyway,
I just say there's no fucking rules when it comes to that. Be careful. Don't be lazy. Remember that what you're writing will be seen.
Yes.
So unless it really feels like I want to convey this in the best way I can convey that is by using the royal we.
Yeah. Then go with it.
Go for it.
Then go with it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's good.
So other rules, I think calling out specific music.
Hello, fam. Hello.
Calling out specific music. It can be limiting, because we read a script recently. I didn't know 3/4 of the music that was referenced in that script, and it meant nothing to me, and it was a waste of space.
Right.
In that particular.
But interestingly, like, I knew one of them, and it was in my head for days.
Sure, totally. So, but again, you never know. You never know what
our script for the princess, the first draft, had music cues in it.
It did, and it had one specific one.
One specific. I think we might have done two somewhere in the script, but we
called out. We said, and during this, Barracuda plays, and then even jokingly, like after action, she slices off his head. Ooh, Barracuda! You know, like we were having fun with that.
Fun.
Yeah, and I think you should go. Is this going to be really well known by everyone who's going to be reading this script?
Yeah. I think
and does it serve the moment I'm trying?
That's the key. If you can say that the moment could be served by a hard rock song picks up with a guitar riff that gets us in the mood, like, versus having to say a specific song, then I would always go with the former.
Yeah.
If the specific song is important to the story or the character, like if you have to call out that they're listening to Ani DiFranco because part of their character is that they're the biggest Ani DiFranco fan ever, like, then I get it, but
if they're singing along to it.
Or if they're singing along to it, that's a whole other thing, right? Yeah. If they're singing, we did have a music thing in another script where
they were singing along to Coolio's Gangster's Paradise.
Oh, and in another one, we had a guy singing in the shower.
Totally, it's absolutely right.
So I mean, that's different. The idea that people say don't ever put music cues in because you don't know if you'll be able to get that music for the production. I say forget that. Everybody reading it knows you don't know whether you're going to be able to get that music for production. And
is it serving the story?
Is it serving the story?
First thing. Is it specific? And is it very important? But if it's like she comes home from work, slumps down in front of the TV, puts on some depressing music, or some, you go like something like Blank by Adele, whatever.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. By just using the word something like, you can get away with a lot.
Totally. Yeah.
And sometimes to elicit the clearest and cleanest image, a specific song, especially if it's a popular song that everybody knows, that will be better.
Yeah.
That can make the read better. But I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, saying, if you're worried about it and you go, a song like blank plays on the radio, is fine. So that is a rule.
There's that one. Then I would also say overuse of parentheses.
Ooh, parentheticals, really? Now that's one that. Now, do you think that's a valid rule or a non-valid rule?
I think it's a valid rule.
Well, I will say we have changed our writing significantly over the years.
We have, and as we talked about, I think in another episode, we sometimes use it as a formatting cheat. And what I mean by that is there a way I can, so for example, generally, a parenthetical is used for, I am trying to make sure that you, the reader, understand the way in which this line is being delivered. Because I can say, thanks, Ben, or I can say, thanks, Ben.
I roll.
So sometimes that's necessary. What we don't like, because we feel that it takes up space, is what we call line action, which is when one person is talking and the other person is doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jake, I think we should go to the circus today. Ben nods, but doesn't say anything. Jake continued, I really like the circus. I think there's a way that we could get in for free. Ben gets up and leaves the room. Jake, wait, Ben, where are you going? Aren't we going to the circus? So that would be line, action, line, action, line, action. And to be clear, when you format that, that's almost a third of a page.
Right.
Because you've got a line for Jake, a line of my dialogue, a space, a line of action, another space, another line taken up by my name, another, it takes up the way that these screenwriting software is formatted. So what we've taken to doing is putting a parenthetical in the middle of that to alleviate that. So now it would read, Jake, I really want to go to the circus today. In parentheticals, Ben just nods.
Or off Ben's nod.
Or off Ben's nod. Yes, totally. A bit more. Ben gets up and walks away again. And all of a sudden, that now 8 or 9 lines has now become 6.
There's also a version that we've taken to doing that people would probably frown upon, but I think it's totally fine, which is, Ben and Jake are sitting at a bar, and drinking beer. Ben says, how you doing today, Jake? Jake, parenthetical, drinks.
Yes.
It's been a rough one.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And so the drink is technically action. And a lot of people would say, well, wait a minute. There should be a line that said Jake drinks.
Totally.
But it's such a cleaner read.
Absolutely.
And the drinks informs the dialogue. And so if it's action that informs the dialogue, it's not it's like it's a cheat, but it's also like, it's a cheat, but it's kind of not. But it informs the way they're going to talk. So it's
totally, absolutely right. Yeah. And ultimately, with that, it's what's the most efficient use of space? Again, it's something that we don't really talk about hugely as screenwriters. We're also about what's the dialogue, what's the action, but ultimately, you're trying to write a screenplay that is going to be as short as possible. Because the longer the screenplay, the less likely someone is to, honestly, sadly, move forward with it. They might not even read it if it's too long. So what is the way you can make something as pithy as possible and yet still get all the meaning that you, the writer, want to do it? So overuse of parenthetical, I really frown on, because I get the way that you're meant to say that.
I would say, for me, I would qualify that by saying overuse of parentheticals with adjectives.
Yes.
If the parenthetical includes a verb and or a reactionary idea that still informs a dialogue, but is not something that is a line read.
Yes.
I'm okay with it.
Sure.
And one of our, I would say, more recent mentors on a TV show had us doing way more. And he's very, very, very successful, been doing a very long time writer, who was like, make it a parenthetical. Make it a parenthetical.
Yeah, and that's it. That's what we're talking about earlier. Is there a way to make this line of action a parenthetical? And that, I think, has been our cheat. I don't think it's everything is cheating. I just think it's a formatting thing that lets you go.
It's a stylistic thing. It's not going to fuck up the read. That's the important part.
Yes.
No one is going to be confused. Wait, is that action, or is that supposed to be the way he says it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And I think from you're writing for a read. You're writing to create the best version in somebody's mind.
Yeah.
Not about the rules. It's as a read.
And so I will add one final thing, which is camera movement and camera direction, or what's often known as directing on the page.
Right.
So again, do I need to say we track along, we dolly along, all of that stuff? Or do I just need to see what's happening? If I want to say moving through the field, or they walk through the field, I know what I'm seeing on the screen. It's them walking through the field.
Yeah, it's what we were saying earlier.
Exactly. And ultimately, what I feel that it does is if I call out cameras and things like that, I'm actually strangely taken out of the experience, the visceral experience I'm having dealing with and reading a story about people. And all of a sudden, I'm a director.
It feels like production instead of storytelling.
Yes, it does. And that's it. I think it's a very good way of putting it. It becomes about production rather than about, so again, overuse of parenthetical, overuse of or use of song, or even overuse of we see.
Or editing. Yeah, it's directing and editing and all the things that go to other, that aren't really our job.
Yeah.
And I think that, as always, if it's the best possible way to write that in your movie, go for it.
Go for it.
I don't believe, as you were saying, though, it depends on who's reading your script.
It does.
If you're submitting to competitions, which I could do an entire other half an hour on competitions, but if you are submitting to competitions, they may frown upon some of these screenwriting rules.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. Why are we writing screenplays? Are we writing for competitions? No, we're not.
Totally.
We're writing to get movies made.
TV
made. And if you can get your scripts to people who are actually part of this business, a lot of these rules fall away. If you only can get your script to the gatekeepers that are on the outskirts of the business, the young, out of college, out of film school readers, that's where you might end up hitting some roadblocks with rules.
Sure.
I hear it. A lot of rules in the Princess scripts in various different ways.
Absolutely.
There are lots of rules about spacing. There are lots of rules about slug lines. There are lots of rules about where certain things should happen on certain pages. All of that stuff is so subjective.
Yes.
It's good to know what they are.
I agree. And it's like we were talking about, again, it's another episode. It's like knowing something, if it's, hey, an inciting incident should happen between pages 10 and 15. Well, what's that? Why does that thought process exist? Well, it means that something should happen early on in the script that makes the audience go, oh, I was starting to get comfortable when something changed. Something changed. And again, can you go, well, what if something changes on page 1? Yeah, it can do. And that's a choice as well. And what do you lose if you do that there? What do you go, oh, I'm not going to get a chance to know this person in quite the same way or whatever. But again, it's just about knowledge. Or you go, don't worry, I'm going to put that later.
Yeah, because you can go, actually, the story's better that way. The experience of watching the movie is better that way.
Absolutely right. I mean, it's what we did with The Princess. We wanted boom, action, straight from the, we wanted the first paragraph to be like, okay, I've seen this movie before because it's about a fairy tale princess. And the second paragraph was like, and then she kills them all. You go, oh, cool. In that moment, you were in.
Totally.
So anyway, that's today's discussion of rules. There are no rules, but it's good to be aware of certain things.
Yeah, I think that's really important for anyone watching that is looking to write. And if you've heard of rules that you are curious about and don't know whether they're ones that are actually things people care about, comment and let us know what those rules are, because I'll be curious. I would say I've never, not once in our entire career since we sold Winter's Night, had anyone look at our script of ours and say, you need to change this because you're not supposed to do it that way.
Yeah, totally.
Not a single time. Not with any of the things we just talked about, and not with other things that we've done.
Sure, totally.
So by all means, I'd love to hear what writing teachers and your mentors have told you about
what book you read. I'll take my sweatshirt off. It's very hot. I'm just going over here to do this.
Baker's